Well, hello, this is Nadine, and today I'm going to show you how to do a basic Tunisian crochet sock. Um, for this video, I'll be using a double-ended crochet hook, as is necessary when we work Tunisian crochet in the round. I will be using a 6mm hook that I have here, the Clover Takumi, and I'll be using a regular worsted yarn just to show you how to do a basic sock. Of course, if you are making socks for yourself, you will most likely use sock yarn or fingering weight yarn. But for the case of this video, I'm using worsted weight in 2 balls, as we see here, or 2 skeins. We must work with 2 balls when we work in the round in Tunisian crochet. I also need a stitch marker. I prefer to keep several stitch markers handy throughout my work, to be able to count stitches and rows and so forth, but you at least need 1 or 2 stitch markers.
So with the image of the foot here, I'd like to describe to you the basic construction of a sock. The foot is divided into 3 distinct sections. For the ebook and the checklist to help you measure your own feet for customized socks, please see description below. So the foot for the construction of a sock is divided into 3 distinct sections. So the foot part, which is from the toe to the beginning of the leg approximately, around the arch. Then it's the heel and the leg. So with the checklist, you'll be able to measure your foot exactly as described, and you'll be able to make your first sock and then follow those values to make the second sock.
So let's begin. So to begin, you take your hook, you do your little magic knot there, just to get started, okay? And here we chain 8. Then we will link or join into a circle into the back bump of the first chain, and do a little slip stitch there. As you can see, that first loop will be your first stitch. A quick reminder, in Tunisian crochet, all the loops stay on the hook, and each loop is a stitch. So, to begin, we have a circle here, as you can see, and I want to do my forward pass, and I insert my hook through the back bumps of the next stitches. And when we work in the round, a quick reminder, obviously you can't fit all the loops on the hook since you're working in the round, so at some point you need to shift to begin a return pass. So I'm going to do it right now, so I can't fit any more loops on my hook. For the return pass, the first time, you need to go get the other strand of yarn, as you can see here, and do another magic knot and begin your return pass. So you pull that first loop there, you pull through 1, and you do that the first time, and now you pull it through 2. Pull through 2, and try and keep at least a couple of loops on the hook when you go back to the forward pass to finish the round, I should say, and continue inserting the hook in the back bumps. Now I'm at the end of my circle here. Got one more. So we began with 8 chains. We do the return pass now. I prefer to keep 3 loops on the hook to keep my tension. That's my preference, but that's up to you. Okay, so now we're at the end of that round. And here I will insert my stitch marker, which I insert in the first stitch, and I move up at each round. Now I begin the second round, and we have to do an increase. So, and we're working with a Tunisian knit stitch. So to do the knit stitch, you insert your hook between the bars and go get your yarn over at behind. Okay, and to do an increase, it's a knit stitch in the first stitch, and then an increase, which is just inserting the hook between stitches. So we repeat that. So it's a little difficult at first when you begin your circle. You could always begin with a Tunisian magic circle if you wish. The principle is the same. You will need to do 8. So as I said before, you do your Tunisian knit stitch and then an increase. Knit stitch and an increase. At some point, obviously, you need to start the return pass. There I go. And the return pass is always yarning over and pulling through 2 loops. Right. So like I said, I'd like to keep the 3 loops on the hook. That assures me of a certain amount of tension, or a certain equal tension. And I continue my round with a Tunisian knit stitch and an increase. So basically we started with 8 stitches, and with this increase we will double it, so we will end up with 16 stitches around. So So for a comfort level, you need to do a forward pass and a return pass as you see fit, as often as you need to, so that it doesn't get too tight. As the numbers of stitches around increase, you'll be able to fit. There I forgot to put the stitch marker in the first stitch, so sorry about that. Okay, so we finished round 1. The previous round obviously was the foundation row, or round I should say. And we continue increasing in each round following the basic pattern instructions until we reach the width that we require. So now I'm at round 2. I begin, if you're familiar with amigurumi, same principle. So you work the 2 next stitches and you increase after the second. So knit stitch in the next 2, and now an increase. And an increase again is you insert your hook between 2 stitches, yarn over and pull up a loop. So I'm finishing up my second row. So by doing those increases, we increased by 8. So we are at 24 stitches around. Now I'm making a small sock, so I'm only going to do 24 stitches around, just to show you the basic principles. If you want to increase more for a bigger, larger foot, go into the description box, and I will have there the basic instructions for the increases for the toe section. So now we just simply proceed, once you've reached the width, of course, of that you desire, you simply proceed with rounds of knit stitches. So you're creating the main part of the sock for the main part of the foot. So basically a tube as of this point. Now, as you can see the circle, at this point you can decide to sew it shut if you wish, following the line of the stitch marker, which is the first stitch. So you're trying to maintain sort of that line for the toe. So obviously you would just fold it here, obviously from the inside, and then you could sew it shut at any point that you wish. If you want to do it now, you can do it now. If you want to do it later, you can do it later as well. And you would sew right there. So basically, I continued and I did rounds, several rounds, until I reached the measurement that I wish, which is around the arch. And now I want to do the gusset. And the gusset is basically the section where you increase to allow for the heel. Now here I insert another stitch marker at the opposite side of the first. Now if I had 24 stitches around, I divide by 2, and then I put the first stitch marker remains in the first stitch, and the second stitch marker I would put in the 12th. If I had 48 stitches around, I would divide that by 2. I would have the first stitch marker in the first and the second stitch marker in the 24th stitch. So now I'm just going to finish that round here to get to the first stitch, and I want to show you how I do the gusset. Okay, so the gusset is where we will be increasing, and basically the way I explain it in my patterns is that you increase before or after the stitch marker, and you move the stitch marker up. So here I'm starting the round where I'm going to do a gusset increase. So I just do the knit stitches, the Tunisian knit stitch, until the next stitch marker. I have to do the return pass, as I said. Go back to the forward pass. I'm almost at the stitch marker here, as you can see. So I do another knit stitch. I do a knit stitch in the stitch marker stitch, and I do an increase right after that stitch. And now I will move up the stitch marker. So basically move up the stitch marker to not the increase, but the stitch that that I worked vis-a-vis. And now I continue working the Tunisian knit stitch. Oh, here it's a little tight. Another return pass. Oops, a daisy. Like I said, I always like to try to keep 3 loops on the hook when I do my transitions. Now I continue, finish this round, and when I get to the end of this round, I work the last stitch of the round. Oh, again, I forgot. I'm sorry. I forgot to move up the stitch into my first stitch when I began the round. I often do that, so please, I apologize. So now I finished the round. I worked the last stitch, and we do an increase right after the last stitch, which is basically before that first stitch marker. So that's the first round of the gusset section. So now I do another, and we basically increase by 2 stitches every round until we reach the measurement that we established in our checklist. And now I finished that second round, and I'm doing a third round of a gusset increase. So in the end, I would have increased by 6 stitches. Preferably keep different color stitch markers so that you're able to remember which stitch marker is in the first stitch and which stitch marker is in other stitches, so that you can keep track more easily. And as you can see, the gusset increases slightly. You can see it right here. And if that part, if this part right there was the flat part of the foot, you would see it exactly. It would be increasing there to allow space for the beginning part of the leg and the heel. Now, we need to create the heel space, and working in the round, we will need to sort of create loops on the hook. So in Tunisian crochet, there is a particular way of doing it. Now first I want to move my stitch markers because I would like to have an equal amount of stitches in the front and in the back. So since I had started with 24 and I had 12, the half of 24 was 12, and I increased by 6, therefore I have 30 in all. So I want 15 stitches front and back. So I have to move my stitch markers to sort of reflect that. So I move one to a few stitches back, and then you move the other few stitches as well. So okay, so I'll just move this one here. So I had so it was 12. So let's say that's 13. Okay, and then on the other side here, 13. I had 13, so I'll move this one back a few. So that was 13. So that would be 14, and then 15. That would be 15th. Exactly. Now, obviously, because the 15 is an uneven number, obviously you're moving one side, an uneven number, and the other side. That doesn't really matter. When it's even, it's easy. When it's uneven, okay, there's just one off. It doesn't really matter. So to begin this round, I do the knit stitches here, Tunisian knit stitch in the first stitch, and until I reach the other stitch marker. I will do, I think I'll do a return pass here. It's getting a little tight. And I'll be creating loops on hook in this round. So we work the stitch where the stitch marker is. Okay, and from this point on, I have to create loops. And I have to create the same amount of loops as the amount of stitches that I am skipping. So if I have, here I have 15, so I will be creating 15 loops on hook, and then I will join with that first stitch. How do we create the loops? Well, we basically use the principle of the magic knot. Okay, and how do we do it? Watch my fingers carefully. So we basically turn the yarn around both fingers. We insert the hook under the first strand there. We go get the second. Okay, now I need to hold that loop very carefully on my hook. I need to hold it with my finger tightly so that it doesn't move up or down the hook, and then we just let go and pull. So we're basically creating a magic knot. If you're familiar with knitting or how to cast on for knitting, it's the same principle. So again, hold, then let go. Now, obviously, you don't necessarily want your knot here or your loop to be too tight. You don't want it to be too loose, but you don't want it to be too tight. So that may be a little, take a little bit of practice at first, because you will see after, once we do a return pass, how it can get difficult. So again, so like I said, we create, in this case, 15 loops on the hook. And we skip the 15 stitches between the stitch markers, and then we join right away. You can join with the Tunisian knit stitch into the first stitch, to the first stitch marker, and you can work a few more if you want, just so that you can have a steadier hand when you get to the return pass. So you do a return pass, same as usual. You work your yarn over and you pull through 2 loops. Now, as I said, the loops might be tight on the hook, so just be assiduous and careful as you pull through. Just that first round there, that first when we have to go through these loops are probably the most difficult. So you just continue carefully. It doesn't matter if you start seeing it loose. That will be rectified in the next round, you'll see. So as you can see, we created new loops basically from thin air without having to cut and recast. So now I'm just going to finish this round since I already started it when I joined. So I continue with Tunisian knit stitch. And that's the stitch we're using for this basic sock. I like to use this particular stitch because it does look like knitting, and it does make for a very thick sock. Actually a very comfortable and cushy sock. So now to finish the round, we've reached the loops that we just created in the previous round. So we just continue, we just insert our hook there through the bars as best we can. Obviously, the tighter the loops were in the beginning, the tighter it will be here as well, but that's okay. And now we're finished this round. Now I'm just gonna, sorry. I'm basically gonna continue with a few rounds of Tunisian knit stitch. I'll do a short sock. Now, as you can see, and when you fold it a certain way, you'll see exactly what's happening. And I've created the space for the afterthought heel. And now I could go on and do the leg part. I could go as high as I wanted. I'm basically doing a short sock here just for the sake of the video, but you could do what you want. You could continue. This is an example of a sock. You could continue the leg part as many rounds as you want, and then you could do a border as you wish. Here I did a border of with a regular hook of basically single crochet in back loops to create a ribbing, but you can choose what you want. You could just end it with a scalloped edge or as you wish. You could go as high as you want. Here I'm just going to do a few rounds to basically create a little ankle sock for basically this is the size of a child for a child. So now I just finished, and I'm just going to cut. And there you have it. So now we need to start the heel. It's not that hard. So we basically we have the heel. We're going to go around in the spiral, in the circle, the same way we did before. We have the corners there where the stitch markers still are. And I like to keep the corners free for now, so I'm not casting on in the corners. Some people ask you to cast on in the corners. I don't like that. So I cast on basically in the middle, in the back, in the middle. Doesn't really matter exactly which, if it falls exactly in the middle, but because I'm going to be working in the spiral anyway. So I basically cast on there with a knit stitch there through the stitch with a slip stitch, and that loop obviously is my first loop in my first stitch. So I basically continue, and this is like foundation around, I suppose. So I'm just going to go around for one turn and do some the Tunisian knit stitch around for this first round. When we get to the corner, as you can see here, there's a bit of a gap, right? You see it right there? So if you decide, you can decide to close that gap. So if you decide to insert your hook around there and add a stitch, that's fine. If you do that on that side, you have to do it on the other side too. So you see, yeah, that gap. So I want to close it up, so I'm going to try and insert my hook anywhere there to basically close that gap, yeah, like that. So you see, it's, I don't like these gaps in my socks. So I have to make sure that I do it on the other side as well. So then we just continue knit stitching, or the, I should say, Tunisian knit stitch along those created loops, but on the underside of it, you basically do your best to insert your hook as you would for any knit stitch. You would have the same amount of stitches there as you did in the beginning. So that would be around, in this case, it would be 15, because I created 15 loops. Do the best you can. It's not obvious because you're sort of in the other direction, but you can certainly try and find a place to insert your hook. Now I want to do my return pass. Obviously I can't use that strand, so I need to start with a new strand to begin my return pass, because I'm working in the round, obviously. First loop always only one, and then through 2 loops. Okay, so I continue my forward pass here. Okay, so I basically finished my round. I did the other corner, and now I'm done with my round. And now I'm going to start my second round. I like to put a stitch marker on that first stitch that I would do to begin the round, just to help me count the number of rounds that I will need for my heel, for the heel part. And as I mentioned before, in the checklist in my pattern, in the ebook, there's a place where you can indicate how many rounds you do for the heel, because remember, you do one sock, you need to repeat. So now I'm at the corner again, and I want to start decreasing. So I basically use the corner stitch as the middle stitch. I want to do 3 together. So I basically insert my hook under the first bar, then the second bar, and that's the middle stitch, and then the third bar. Okay, I do my yarn over, and then I just pull through the 3 loops there, exactly. So I've just done a decrease, so I've basically decreased from 2 to 1. And that's the first corner. Now I continue to the next corner. Again, I have the corner stitch right here. So I want to do another decrease. So insert my hook under the 3 bars, yarn over, pull through the 3 loops. So I've had my second decrease. So I will be decreasing by 4 stitches every round for the heel. Now I finish this round and I start the next one. And when I get to the corner again, basically use the stitch that you decreased from the previous round as your middle stitch in your next decrease. So you take the stitch right before, you insert your hook under that bar, you insert the hook under the bar of the decreased stitch, then the next one, and now you do another decrease. And as you can see, that those gaps there disappeared. So you're basically decreasing again, using the decreased stitches of the previous rounds as your middle stitches. Again, this is the next corner. Another decrease. And now I'm going to finish the round with the Tunisian knit stitch. So basically you go around and around and you decrease at the corners, as I just showed, and as you continue to decrease, the heel will get smaller and smaller and smaller until you reach about 8 or 6 stitches around, so that and that will be your last round, so keep track of that. And the reason why I ask for 6 to 8 stitches around and then to sew at that point is that, as you can see here, it would give you a more rounded heel. If you continued decreasing until you only had one, you would reach sort of a pointy heel, which I don't enjoy. So to arrive to 6 to 8 stitches around, that means you would have basically either 4 stitches on either side, in front and in back, or 3 stitches in front and back approximately, and then you sew that part together, and it makes for a more rounded heel, as you can see right there. So that's basically how you would do the toe up basic Tunisian crochet sock. So for more patterns or tutorials, check out our website. You'll see at the end of this video or in the description box. Happy crochet!